The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow across the open field, but nothing in that moment seemed to matter to the young girl in the wheelchair. She sat still, watching the horizon, her heart heavy with thoughts no one seemed to understand. She had been trapped in this wheelchair for so long, longer than she could remember, and it felt like no one had any answers. The world seemed to move on without her, while she was left behind, held captive by her own body. Her mind, however, was still as alive as anyone else's. But the weight of her circumstances had begun to break her down, little by little. The sound of hooves broke through her thoughts. It was soft at first, barely noticeable, but then it grew louder, closer. At first, she thought it was just another moment of wishful thinking, hoping that something, anything, could pull her out of the darkness. But this time, it wasn't her imagination. Out of the trees, a horse appeared. The horse was nothing short of magnificent, its coat gleamed in the sunlight, a rich brown color that seemed to dance as the animal trotted closer. It was a rescue horse, just like her. Abandoned, lost, and in need of love and care. The girl had heard about the horse from the local shelter, but seeing it in person was an entirely different experience. The horse stopped a few feet away, its large, kind eyes locking with hers. For a moment, everything around her seemed to fade into the background. All she could see was the horse. The horse took a few more steps closer, its nose nearly brushing the edge of her wheelchair. The girl froze, unsure of what to do. She had always been wary of animals, unsure of how they would react to her disability. But there was something about this horse, something in the way it looked at her, that made her feel safe. Without warning, the horse lowered its head, gently nudging the girl's leg with its muzzle. A soft, delicate nudge, as though it were asking for her trust. Her heart fluttered, unsure whether to be scared or to accept the invitation. She reached out hesitantly, her hand trembling as it touched the horse's soft, warm nose. It was then that she realized something truly extraordinary. The horse wasn't just a beautiful animal, it was a creature that seemed to understand. It was as if the animal knew her struggles, her pain, and her frustration. It wasn't just a random act of kindness, it was something deeper, something more profound. In that moment, the girl felt the faintest spark of hope, a feeling that had been missing from her life for far too long. The horse stood there, patient, allowing the girl to take her time. It seemed to understand the delicate nature of the situation, how fragile the girl's trust was. There was no rush, no expectation. Just a quiet, gentle presence that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. And then, without warning, something unexpected happened. The horse nudged her again. This time more firmly, but it wasn't a request, it was more of a command. As though the animal had decided that today, this moment, would be the day everything changed. With an energy that surprised even herself, the girl, shaking but determined, slowly began to push the wheels of her chair forward. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fast. But with each turn of the wheel, the girl felt a surge of courage she hadn't felt in years. The horse didn't move away, didn't run off. It stayed with her, walking alongside her, as if it were walking for both of them. Together, they moved. It was slow at first, but with every passing moment, the girl felt herself becoming stronger, more determined. The first few steps were tentative, unsure, but with each step, she felt something inside of her change. The bond between the horse and the girl began to grow, and with it, something unexpected, something she hadn't felt in so long, began to bloom inside her, hope. This was just the beginning. What happened next would defy every expectation and show the world just how powerful the connection between humans and animals could be. It wasn't just a rescue, it was a transformation, one that would change both the girl's life and the life of the horse forever. And the moment they shared that first step together, neither of them knew that their journey had only just begun. But one thing was clear, the bond they shared was undeniable, and it was about to lead them to a place neither of them could have ever imagined. For as long as she could remember, the girl had been facing a battle that no one seemed to understand. Growing up, she had always been different, her body failing to keep up with her dreams, her desires, and her spirit. What others took for granted, simple walks, running, jumping, had become the most unattainable things for her. She had learned to live with it, or at least pretend she had. But deep inside, the weight of her condition had begun to bury her spirit. Her family had tried everything to make her life easier, but no matter how much love they gave, no matter how many treatments or therapies she tried, there were days when she just couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. The wheelchair, once a tool for independence, now felt more like a prison, a constant reminder of everything she couldn't do. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt free, the last time she had felt truly alive, outside of the walls of her own home. Her friends, well-meaning but distant, would visit her occasionally, but their lives seemed so full of possibilities. They talked about their adventures, their dreams, their futures, while she sat there, feeling like an outsider in her own life. It was like watching a movie through a window that couldn't open. She would smile, nod, and tell them everything was fine. But inside, she felt the loneliness creeping in. There were days when the weight of everything became unbearable, and she would retreat into herself, shutting the world out. She would sit in silence, staring out at the world beyond her window, wishing for something to change. But nothing did. Life went on, indifferent to her pain. And with each passing day, she sank deeper into a well of doubt. She had often wondered if things would ever be different, if she would ever feel like herself again, if she would ever feel alive. Some days, it felt like the world had moved on without her, leaving her behind in a place that seemed hopeless. Then came the news about the rescue horse. At first, she hadn't thought much of it. The family had always been involved with animal rescues, and the idea of another animal needing a home didn't seem like a big deal. But as the days passed and she learned more about this horse, a horse who had faced its own struggles, its own suffering, it began to intrigue her. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in this horse's journey that mirrored her own. Despite herself, she found herself growing curious. Maybe it was the idea of connecting with something that had fought for its own survival, just as she had. Or maybe, it was the tiny spark of hope that had begun to flicker inside her again, the hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way out of the darkness that had gripped her for so long. When the horse arrived at their home, it was everything she had imagined, and nothing like she had expected. The horse wasn't a perfect creature, but neither was she. The scars on its body, the weariness in its eyes, they spoke of a past filled with hardship. But there was something else there, too. Something in the way it moved, in the way it looked at her. It was as if it recognized her pain, as if it understood. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. The girl stayed in her wheelchair, watching as the horse adjusted to its new surroundings. It was there, but it wasn't yet a part of her world. She kept her distance, unsure of what to do. After all, how could something so powerful and free ever understand her struggles? How could a creature like that possibly change the course of her life? Days passed, and though the girl still found herself drawn to the horse, she kept herself apart. It wasn't fear, exactly, more like doubt. She had tried so many things before, things that promised change, only to leave her disappointed. Could this horse really help her? Could it really make a difference, or was she setting herself up for more disappointment? Still, there was a pull, a nagging feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, there was something more to this horse's arrival than she realized. She watched the animal every chance she got, noticing the way it moved with such grace, its eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed far beyond its years. The horse had been through so much, just as she had. And in a strange way, it gave her hope. It made her wonder if it was possible for her life to change, too. If something so broken, so lost, could be healed. Then maybe there was hope for her, as well. It wasn't an immediate connection, far from it. But there was something growing. Something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. And that was enough for the girl to start believing that maybe this horse had the power to change her life. After all, it was an ordinary morning when the horse finally arrived. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft, early light across the driveway. The girl, still wrapped in her warm blanket, stared out of the window with a sense of anticipation she couldn't quite explain. Her family had been talking about the rescue for weeks, but it wasn't until that moment that it truly hit her. Today was the day. When the truck pulled into the driveway, she wheeled herself closer to the front door, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of the engine faded as the truck came to a stop, but her mind raced. She had seen photos of the horse, read the stories of its difficult past, but nothing could prepare her for the real thing. The door of the truck opened, and the first thing she saw was the horse's dark, soulful eyes. The animal's coat was a little matted, not as shiny as she had imagined, but there was something regal about its presence. It moved slowly, its large hooves making soft thuds as it stepped onto the grass. The girl was struck by the contrast between the horse's gentle movement and the sheer power in its frame. This was no ordinary horse, it was a survivor. She could tell that much just by looking at it. The horse had been through struggles of its own, scars hidden beneath its fur, and yet it walked as though it had overcome them all. It was the kind of animal that could inspire awe in anyone who witnessed it. Her mother guided the horse carefully into the stable, but the girl could see from where she sat that it was unsure, no longer frightened, but uncertain. The animal's past had taught it to be cautious, and though the shelter had cared for it, this new place, this new life, was still foreign to it. The girl wondered if the horse, in some way, understood what it meant to be in a new place, to be faced with a challenge that seemed too great to conquer. In that moment, she couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the horse and she had something in common. They were both lost souls, seeking a way to find their place in a world that didn't always seem to have room for them. Her father came inside to check on her, but she could barely focus on what he was saying. She was too wrapped up in the horse, watching every move, wondering what would happen next. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, noticing her distant look. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice wavered. I want to see it up close." Her father hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but be careful. We don't know what it's been through." The girl nodded, and with her father's help, she slowly wheeled herself outside. The cool morning air felt refreshing against her skin as she moved towards the stable. The horse had settled into a corner of the pen, its large, dark eyes watching her curiously. It took a step toward her, then another, each movement more cautious than the last. As she wheeled closer, she was surprised by how calm the horse seemed. She expected it to be more nervous, but instead, it stood perfectly still, as though waiting for her to make the first move. She reached out a hand tentatively, unsure of what to expect. The horse's ears flicked back slightly, but it didn't move away. Taking a deep breath, the girl extended her hand farther. She could feel the weight of the moment, the anticipation, the vulnerability in the air. She had no idea what to expect, but for some reason, she knew this was the beginning of something important. The horse's large head dipped toward her hand, and for a moment, everything else in the world faded away. The bond between them wasn't instant, but it was undeniable. She could feel it in the way the horse sniffed her hand, then nuzzled her gently. It was a quiet, tender moment, but it spoke volumes. The girl had been afraid to trust in the past, afraid of disappointment, but in that moment, she felt something shift. This horse, despite its own troubled past, wasn't afraid to connect. It wasn't afraid to reach out and trust again. And somehow, the girl knew this was the start of something life-changing. There was no turning back now. She stayed by the stable for hours, watching the horse as it began to settle into its new home. Slowly but surely, it was finding peace in its surroundings. And in a strange way, the girl began to feel the same way. There was something comforting about the presence of this horse, something that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, her own life could change, too. When evening came, and the last light of the day faded, the girl wheeled herself back inside, her heart full of thoughts and emotions she didn't know how to process. All she knew was that the horse had sparked something inside her, a flicker of hope, of change, of possibility. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't so sure that the darkness of her past would define her future. The journey had just begun, and she had no idea where it would lead. But for the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take the first step. The days after the horse's arrival were filled with small, quiet moments that gradually began to change the rhythm of the girl's life. At first, it was little more than a presence in the background, an animal she observed from a distance, unsure whether it would bring the kind of change she had been hoping for. But something about the horse's steady, gentle manner started to break through her doubts. It wasn't just a horse, it was something more, something alive and real, a being that could offer something she had been missing for so long, companionship. In the beginning, the girl didn't push the connection. She spent time sitting by the stable, watching the horse in silence. Her family would help with the feeding and care, but she would remain on the sidelines, hesitant. Each time she wheeled herself toward the stable, she felt a knot of nervousness in her stomach. Was it really possible for her to bond with this creature? What if it didn't want her close? The fear of rejection, so deeply ingrained in her from years of emotional pain, made her second-guess every movement. The horse, however, seemed to understand. It didn't rush her. It didn't expect anything from her. It simply existed, patiently waiting for her to take the next step. And after a few days, the girl found herself taking those small steps. First, she would simply sit and watch, letting the horse get accustomed to her presence. Then, as her confidence grew, she started talking to the horse, softly at first, just words of reassurance. It was as though she were speaking to a friend, someone who wouldn't judge her, someone who would listen. To her surprise, the horse would always respond. Not in words, of course, but in the way it would move toward her when she spoke, the way its ears would twitch as if it were paying attention. Over time, the girl began to feel a strange comfort in these moments. The horse was there, it was listening, and somehow, that was enough to begin healing a part of her that had been broken for a long time. One afternoon, while her family was tending to the house, the girl made a decision. She would try to approach the horse, to see if it would trust her. It had taken time, but she had already started to notice the subtle ways the horse had shown it was ready. So, with a mix of excitement and uncertainty, she wheeled herself closer to the stable. She had her hands on the wheels, her heart pounding. Was this a mistake? But when she arrived at the fence, the horse was there, standing at the edge, waiting for her. For a moment, they just looked at each other, neither moving, both hesitant but connected in some silent way. The girl could feel her breath catch in her throat. This was it. The moment of truth. Slowly, she extended her hand toward the horse, unsure of what to expect. The horse didn't move immediately, but it watched her. She wasn't sure if it was waiting for something, maybe just for her to make the first move. And then, it happened. The horse, with a grace and gentleness that took her by surprise, took a cautious step forward. It nudged her hand, softly, as if inviting her to touch it. Her heart swelled. The animal was offering its trust. The girl slowly placed her hand on the horse's soft, warm nose, feeling the slight warmth of its skin. It was a simple touch, but it was the start of something far more meaningful. She felt an overwhelming sense of relief flood over her. The tension she didn't even realize she had been carrying began to ease. In that moment, she understood. This wasn't just a rescue for the horse, it was a rescue for her, too. Every time she visited the stable, the connection between them grew a little deeper. The horse had learned to trust her, and in doing so, it taught her to trust again. Every small victory, every nudge, every step closer, was a win for both of them. Over the next few days, the girl took the time to be with the horse more and more. She began grooming it, running her fingers through its mane, feeling the softness of its fur. The horse responded by leaning into her touch, as if it, too, needed this bond. It was slow, and there were moments when she would hesitate, unsure if the horse would pull away, but it never did. Each time she reached out, the horse leaned into her, offering her its own form of healing. By the end of the week, something extraordinary happened. The girl was sitting in her wheelchair, resting by the stable, when the horse walked up to her, lowered its head, and pressed its forehead against hers. It was a simple, but powerful gesture, a gesture of trust, of understanding, and of connection. The girl could feel the warmth of the horse's breath on her face, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The horse was not just an animal, it had become her companion, a source of strength, a symbol of the resilience both she and the horse shared. That moment marked a turning point. The girl knew that her journey was just beginning, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The horse had shown her that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope, always a chance for something to change. Her world, once filled with doubt and fear, was beginning to open up. And she couldn't wait to see where the journey with her new friend would take her. Just when it seemed like the girl's life was on the cusp of something beautiful, a dark cloud appeared. It was as though the world, having allowed her a taste of happiness, now wanted to test how far she was willing to go. The days that followed that powerful moment with the horse were filled with small victories, each one more fulfilling than the last. But as with all things in life, progress wasn't always linear. It started with the girl's health. For the past few weeks, she had felt a renewed sense of strength, thanks in part to the horse's presence in her life. She had been able to push her wheelchair further each day, spend more time in the fresh air, and find joy in the simplest of tasks. Her family had noticed the change. They had seen her smiling more, laughing more, and even taking more initiative in her daily life. They were proud of her progress, and she was beginning to feel proud of herself, too. But then, the pain returned. It started as a dull ache, the kind that would come and go, easily ignored. But as the days wore on, the discomfort intensified. At first, the girl didn't want to admit that something was wrong. She didn't want to believe that her body, her fragile, unreliable body, was betraying her again. She wanted so badly to hold on to the progress she had made, to continue the journey with the horse and let her newfound confidence carry her forward. But one afternoon, as she wheeled herself toward the stable to visit the horse, the pain became unbearable. It was sharp, stabbing, a constant reminder of how fragile her body truly was. She tried to push through it, but it was no use. She couldn't even make it to the stable. She had to stop, unable to move another inch. Tears welled up in her eyes, a mix of frustration, helplessness, and fear. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the emotional toll that accompanied it, the feeling of losing control once again. The girl had worked so hard to regain a sense of independence, to prove that she wasn't defined by her wheelchair. But now, her body was telling her she couldn't keep up, and the world she had started to build with the horse seemed to be slipping away. Her family noticed the change immediately. Her father, in particular, had been so hopeful. He had seen the sparkle in her eyes again, the hope that had returned with the arrival of the horse. But now, he could see the same sadness creeping back into her gaze. "You don't have to push yourself," he said gently, sitting beside her on the porch. "We'll take it slow. The horse isn't going anywhere. We can wait." But waiting felt impossible. The girl felt like she had been waiting her whole life. Waiting for the right moment, for something to change, for her life to be different. She didn't want to wait anymore. She wanted to be strong again. She wanted to keep moving forward. And yet, she couldn't. For the next few days, the girl stayed in bed, her body refusing to cooperate. She watched the world go on outside her window, feeling the deep ache of being left behind. Her family tried to reassure her, but their words didn't reach her. All she could focus on was the pain, the constant reminder of her limitations. The horse, too, seemed to sense the change. When the girl finally found the strength to visit the stable again, she saw the animal standing quietly in the corner, as if waiting for her. But the moment she wheeled herself close, the pain flared again, and she couldn't bring herself to move any closer. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the horse, feeling a sense of guilt wash over her. She had promised herself she would keep going, that she wouldn't let anything hold her back. But here she was, stuck once again. The horse took a step toward her, its soft eyes never leaving hers. And in that moment, the girl realized something. The horse wasn't angry with her. It wasn't disappointed in her. It was just there, steadily, patiently, offering a quiet kind of support that didn't demand anything in return. The girl's hand reached out instinctively, and she felt the horse nuzzle her fingers gently, as if to say, "You're not alone." But the setback was hard to overcome. The girl didn't know how to reconcile the hope she had felt with the pain that had returned so suddenly. She wondered if she would ever get back to the place where she could walk beside the horse, where she could feel the freedom she had once dreamed of. It seemed so far away now. For a few more days, the girl stayed in her room, unsure of how to move forward. It was as though the world had been full of possibilities one moment, and the next, those possibilities had vanished. The uncertainty, the fear, the doubt, everything she had worked so hard to leave behind came rushing back. But just as the horse had been patient with her, so too did she need to be patient with herself. She knew this was only a temporary setback, that it didn't define her. But it was hard. It was so much harder than she had imagined. And yet, deep down, she felt a small flicker of hope. The horse was still there, waiting for her, just as it had been from the very beginning. The connection was real, and no setback could take that away. The girl closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and in that moment, she knew she wasn't giving up. She would fight through this, just as she had fought through every other challenge. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days after her setback were a blur of uncertainty. The girl's body still ached, and she found herself trapped in a cycle of frustration and doubt. The pain didn't completely go away, but something inside her began to shift. She didn't know exactly when it happened, but one morning, as she sat by the window, looking out at the world she longed to be part of, something changed within her. It wasn't the sudden burst of energy she had expected. It wasn't a miraculous recovery. It was quieter than that, more subtle. It was as though the weight of her doubts had finally been lifted, little by little. And in their place, something else was beginning to take root, a quiet resolve, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was something she hadn't fully understood until now. Her thoughts drifted back to the horse. Every time she had been near it, she had felt a sense of peace, a feeling of connection she couldn't explain. The horse had always been patient with her, never pushing, never rushing. It had simply been there, steady and constant. In some ways, it was more than just a rescue, it was a symbol, a reminder that even when things seemed hopeless, there was always a chance for change. One morning, after several days of rest, the girl decided to try again. She couldn't stay in bed forever. She couldn't keep letting the pain control her life. She had to take control again, even if it was just a small step. So, she wheeled herself toward the stable, her heart beating with both excitement and fear. What if she couldn't do it? What if the pain stopped her once more? But as she approached the stable, something felt different. The horse was standing by the gate, as if it were waiting for her. Its eyes met hers, and in that moment, she felt a shift. It wasn't just the horse waiting for her, it was as if the horse understood. It understood the struggle, the pain, and the fear. And in return, it offered her something she hadn't expected, reassurance. The horse stepped forward, slowly at first, and then more confidently. It walked right up to her, lowering its head to touch her hand gently with its muzzle. The girl's breath caught in her throat. The familiar warmth and softness of the horse's touch filled her with a sense of calm. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease. There was something about the horse, something about this moment, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could get through this. She smiled and petted the horse's mane, her fingers brushing through the strands. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope, something more than just the faint flicker she had been holding on to. This horse wasn't just helping her get through the pain, it was helping her see beyond it. It was helping her believe that there was still more to life than what she had known. Without thinking, the girl began to push herself closer to the stable gate, a quiet determination growing inside her. The horse moved alongside her, stepping carefully and rhythmically, its hooves making soft sounds against the ground. The girl felt a connection that was deeper than words, an unspoken understanding between them. She was no longer just a girl in a wheelchair, stuck in her pain and doubts. She was someone who had been given a chance, someone who was finding her way back to life. The pain didn't completely vanish, but it faded into the background as she focused on the steady rhythm of her chair's wheels turning, the quiet companionship of the horse walking beside her. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, the girl realized she was not alone. She wasn't just pushing through the world on her own anymore. There was another being, steady and unwavering, right by her side. They continued together, the girl and the horse, moving slowly but steadily through the field. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. But it was progress. It was a journey, one that the girl knew she was ready to take, no matter how long it took. With each turn of the wheel, she felt herself growing stronger, her heart opening up to the possibility that this transformation wasn't just something physical. It was something emotional, something spiritual. The girl knew that life would continue to test her, that there would be setbacks and struggles ahead. But she also knew that she wasn't the same person who had entered this journey weeks ago. She had changed. And in her heart, she believed that the bond with the horse had ignited something in her that no setback could ever extinguish. She looked down at the horse, its soft eyes watching her with a quiet understanding, and she smiled. They were in this together. And no matter what happened, she knew they would continue this journey side by side. The weeks that followed were nothing short of remarkable. It wasn't immediate, it didn't happen overnight, but with each passing day, the girl could feel herself becoming someone new. The horse had been her constant companion, a steady presence in her life that never wavered. And, in turn, she had become stronger, more confident, more willing to embrace the challenges that life presented. The pain had not completely disappeared, but it had become something she could manage. She had learned how to listen to her body, how to push herself just enough without overdoing it. The horse had taught her this, in its own silent way. The animal didn't rush, didn't demand, didn't ask for anything but a steady, consistent effort. It was an approach she had adopted in her own life: small steps, steady progress, and unwavering trust in the process. There were days when the pain would flare up again, when she would question if she was truly capable of pushing through. But then she would think of the horse, how it had overcome its own struggles and was now standing tall, strong, and confident by her side. She would remind herself that she had come so far already, and that this moment, like all the others, was just another part of the journey. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, the girl decided to try something she hadn't even considered before. It wasn't something her family had suggested. It wasn't something the doctors had advised. It was something she had decided for herself. She wanted to try walking. It wasn't a grand, sweeping gesture. It wasn't a dramatic leap into the unknown. It was a simple, quiet desire to stand on her own 2 feet, even if only for a moment. She had been working toward this moment in small, subtle ways, gaining strength with each visit to the stable, gaining confidence with each step she took beside the horse. Her father was with her when she made the decision. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice full of concern. She nodded, her eyes focused on the horse standing just a few feet away. "I think I'm ready." He helped her out of the wheelchair and stood beside her, steadying her as she placed one foot on the ground, then the other. It felt strange at first, unnatural, as though her body had forgotten what it was like to stand. But she was determined. Slowly, she shifted her weight, letting her legs take the pressure. She took a step, then another, and another. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't graceful, but it was a step forward, and that was all that mattered. The horse was watching her from across the field, its eyes fixed on her as she stood there. As if it knew. As if it could feel the significance of the moment. The girl paused, feeling the ground beneath her feet, feeling the small surge of pride in her chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was standing tall, standing, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Her father, standing beside her, smiled. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You've come so far." But the girl's gaze was still on the horse. It had been with her every step of the way, its quiet presence, its patience, its strength had been her anchor. And now, as she stood on her own 2 feet for the first time in so long, she realized something profound. She had done it. She had come this far, not just because of her own strength, but because of the bond she shared with that horse. Together, they had found a way through the darkness. The horse took a few slow steps toward her, its hooves making soft impressions in the earth. It was as if it knew, as if it understood what this moment meant. The girl held out her hand, and the horse came to stand beside her, its head low as it nudged her gently. She smiled, feeling the warmth of the horse's touch against her hand. This moment, this transformation, was not just hers. It belonged to both of them. "Thank you," she whispered to the horse, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me." For a moment, she stood there with the horse, the two of them sharing a bond that words could never fully capture. She knew there would still be difficult days ahead, still moments of doubt and pain. But she also knew that she was stronger than she had ever been before. She was no longer trapped in the limitations of her wheelchair. She was free, free to live, free to hope, and free to embrace whatever the future held. With the horse by her side, she knew that anything was possible. For the girl, the transformation she had undergone with the horse at her side was nothing short of miraculous. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, and spiritual. She had learned to push through pain, to trust again, and most importantly, to believe in her own strength. But despite the progress she had made, there was still one final test waiting for her, a challenge that would push her to the very edge of what she thought was possible. The test came unexpectedly, as life often does. One morning, her father received a phone call. The voice on the other end was serious, urgent. It was the doctor who had been overseeing her condition, and the news wasn't good. The girl needed to undergo a new treatment, one that had the potential to help her move forward, but it also came with serious risks. The treatment could cause extreme pain, and there was no guarantee of success. In fact, many people who had undergone the procedure before her had failed, leaving them more damaged than they had been before. The decision wasn't easy. The girl had already faced so much in her life, her body had failed her so many times before, and now, there was a chance that this treatment could break her, could undo everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The doubts began to creep in. Was it worth the risk? Could she really go through with something that might bring her back to the place she had fought so hard to escape? Her family was torn. Her father was worried, but supportive. Her mother was afraid, but hopeful. They didn't want her to go through more pain, but they also knew that this might be her last chance to regain a sense of normalcy, to live without constant limitations. They all knew that, if she decided to go ahead with it, she would need more than just medical support. She would need her own strength, her own resolve. And the girl, despite her fear, decided to move forward. She wasn't ready to give up on the life she had started to rebuild. She had come so far, had fought so hard to reclaim herself, that the thought of retreating now was unbearable. The decision was made, and the girl prepared herself for what was to come. The treatment was scheduled for the next week. As the day drew closer, she spent more time with the horse, needing the comfort and stability it had always offered her. Every visit to the stable was a reminder of how far she had come. The horse seemed to sense the change in her, its quiet presence providing a calming reassurance. It didn't say anything, but it didn't need to. It was there, walking beside her, offering the support she would need to face the unknown. On the day of the treatment, the girl felt a mix of nerves and determination. Her family was with her, as they always had been, offering words of encouragement, trying to ease her anxiety. But deep down, she knew that this wasn't something anyone else could do for her. This was her fight. And the girl had learned something over the past few months: she was no longer afraid of fighting. The hospital room was cold, sterile, and filled with the sounds of machines beeping softly in the background. She was lying on the bed, waiting for the procedure to begin. Her family was there, offering their support, but as the time drew nearer, the girl felt her heart pounding in her chest. The uncertainty was overwhelming. She had no way of knowing what would happen next. Would she make it through? Would the pain be unbearable? What if she failed? But then she thought of the horse, the way it had stood by her, the way it had shown her that change was possible, that the impossible could become real. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, remembering all the steps she had taken to get here. She had faced her darkest days and come out stronger. This was just another challenge to overcome. And with the horse's spirit in her heart, she felt a strength inside her that could carry her through. The procedure began, and the pain was immediate. It was sharp, overwhelming, as the doctors worked their way through the complex procedure. The girl gritted her teeth, trying to hold on to her strength, but it felt like everything inside her was screaming. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. But then, just as the pain seemed unbearable, something remarkable happened. She remembered the moments with the horse, the quiet companionship, the steady rhythm of their walks together. She remembered the way the horse had gently nudged her forward when she was unsure, the way it had taught her to trust again. And in that moment, the girl understood something profound: the horse hadn't just been her companion through physical pain, it had been her guide through all the uncertainty in her heart. With every breath, the girl focused on that steady rhythm, that quiet confidence. She thought of the horse's patient presence and found herself calming, grounding herself in that connection. The pain didn't disappear, but she was no longer consumed by it. The strength she had found in the horse, in their bond, began to take root in her own body. It was as though the horse's power had become her own. As the procedure came to an end, the girl opened her eyes, surprised to find that she had made it through. She was exhausted, but she had done it. The worst of the pain had passed, and she knew, in that moment, that she had not only survived the treatment but had emerged stronger than ever. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: she had the strength to face it. And with the horse beside her, she knew there was nothing that could stop her from reaching the life she had always dreamed of. The weeks that followed the procedure were a time of quiet reflection and slow recovery. The pain that had once been so overwhelming had diminished, though it hadn't completely disappeared. But the girl was no longer the same person who had walked into that hospital room. She was stronger now, not just in her body, but in her spirit. Every day, as she wheeled herself toward the stable, she could feel the difference in herself. She was no longer weighed down by doubt or fear. She had overcome so much, and now, the future no longer felt so uncertain. The horse, as it had always done, remained by her side, a constant source of strength and reassurance. It never judged, never pushed, just quietly waited for her to take the next step, ready to walk with her whenever she was ready. The girl spent more time with the horse than ever, finding peace in its steady presence. It had been there through her lowest moments, through her fears and doubts, and now, it was there to celebrate the new chapter of her life. One morning, after a particularly long walk with the horse, the girl sat down on a bench near the field, looking out at the world she had so desperately wanted to be a part of. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything. It felt like the perfect moment to reflect on everything she had learned, everything she had been through. Her thoughts drifted to the days before the horse had come into her life, when everything had seemed hopeless, when she had believed that her condition would forever define her. She had thought that the pain and the isolation would never end, that she was destined to live a life full of limitations. But now, as she sat there, watching the horse graze peacefully nearby, she realized something profound. It wasn't just the horse that had brought about this transformation. It was her willingness to change, her decision to fight through the darkness, even when it seemed impossible. The horse had been the catalyst, the symbol of hope, but it was her heart, her mind, and her determination that had carried her through. She smiled softly to herself, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She had learned so much during this journey, not just about strength and perseverance, but about trust. She had learned to trust in others, in the horse, in her family, and most importantly, in herself. The girl realized that the greatest lesson she had learned was that she was not defined by her circumstances, no matter how difficult they might be. She was defined by the choices she made, by her ability to rise above the pain and the fear and to take one step forward, even when it seemed like the world was pulling her back. The girl turned to look at the horse, who had paused and was now standing quietly by her side. The animal's gaze met hers, and in that moment, the girl understood. They had both been on a journey of healing, a journey of discovery, and together, they had proven that the impossible could be achieved with patience, trust, and perseverance. The horse had been her companion through it all, and she had learned to walk beside it, not just physically, but emotionally, as well. With a final deep breath, the girl stood up from the bench, feeling a renewed sense of strength in her body. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled her. It no longer defined her. She was free to live her life, free to chase the dreams she had once thought out of reach. And as she wheeled herself toward the horse, ready for another day of walking together, she knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, and life would never be perfect. But with the horse by her side, with the strength she had found within herself, she was ready to face whatever came next. The journey hadn't been easy. It had been filled with setbacks, struggles, and moments of doubt. But it had also been filled with hope, love, and transformation. And in the end, the greatest lesson of all was this: no matter how difficult life may seem, no matter how far the road ahead appears, there is always a way forward. As long as you believe in yourself, trust in those who support you, and never give up on the possibility of change, you can overcome anything. The girl and the horse stood side by side, ready to face the future, knowing that no challenge would ever be too great for them to tackle together.